So hello, this is segment 4. We're going through Annie Ellen McCall Fraser's history. We are in Lynbrook in Atlanta, Georgia on January 12th in 2015. I'm Powell Alexander Fraser Jr., her son. And so we're just going back through. We've been through her history so far from growing up in Florence, South Carolina in the early 20s and 30s and graduating college in the mid-40s, and then going up to school in New York, and then back down to be the secretary for the president of Thornwell Orphanage in Clinton, South Carolina. So this is where we're going to pick up the conversation now. So Mom, you're the secretary at Thornwell, and then Dad is the head of military science, the ROTC unit at Presbyterian College. So how did you all meet?
Well, Presbyterian College is across the street from Thornwell.
Right. So
the Presbyterian Church in Clinton is very, very active, of course, with the college there and Thornwell Orphanage there also. When I went to work and moved onto the campus of Thornwell, Wednesday night came along. I was having dinner with some people I knew in town, and they said, but we go to prayer meeting. I said, that's all right, I'm used to going to prayer meeting. So I went to prayer meeting with them, and of course there was a minister that used to be at my own church in Florence, and I knew him well. And he called on some man to pray at prayer meeting, and after he prayed and he prayed and he prayed and he prayed, and after a while I opened one eye and turned my head so I could see what manner of man that was so glad to be alive. He was just thanking the good Lord for still being alive, and it was the man I married. But the reason he was so grateful, he was just back from the war, and oh my, the experiences he had and the close calls he had.
So we'll go into that in a second. So let's talk about, all right, so you see this guy at prayer meeting, and then what happened after that?
And so I saw him, and then 2 or 3 nights later at a social event in town, I met him, and actually the boy that I went to that social affair with, and he decided to go to it was a picnic out in the country, and we rode in the same car. And I remember on the way back from the picnic, Powell Fraser, whose car we were in, had his block P. He had gone to Presbyterian College and had his athletic, he played football, had his athletic sweater over the back of the seat. And I said to him, I'm so cold and I don't have a sweater, could I borrow your sweater? And he said no, and there was no if and but about it. He meant no. And I said, why not? He said, because you wouldn't give it back. I said, you don't even know me. How do you know I wouldn't give it back? Well, I just know you wouldn't give it back. And so that was that. He wouldn't let me wear his sweater. And,
so what happened after that? So
I took it anyway.
And then he had to call you up.
I had it on and he couldn't get it off.
So he had to call you up later to try to get it.
That's
and
right.
That's how you...
That's exactly.
Okay, so you dated that for a year or two in Clinton.
Yes.
And then...
No, half a year. I knew right away. I was going to marry him.
So let's talk about Dad for a second. So he grew up in Brunswick, Georgia. He lived.
Brunswick was settled by Portuguese.
Yeah.
And it's not the average southern city.
Well, so it's a different. But let's talk about Dad in Florence. So what memories do you have of his mom and dad?
Oh, well, his father had died during the war. I didn't know his father.
Okay, so what about his mother?
And his mother was overcome with 5 children. Had a hard time keeping her head above water after her husband died during the war. He did not die in the war, but he died during the war.
So she was, how long did you know her? Did she?
She lived about 4 or 5 years after we were married. But I knew her well, very well. A typical Southern lady.
Yeah.
Just typical.
So Dad grew up in Brunswick, South Carolina, and then he went to
Brunswick, Georgia.
Brunswick, Georgia. Excuse me. So he went to Presbyterian College, graduated
On a scholarship for playing football. And basketball.
And ROTC.
Well, that was neither here nor there much.
Well, he graduated in 1941 with a second lieutenant's commission in the Army. So he gets that through the ROTC. And then he was, this is 1941, and then of course December 7th arrives and World War II starts, and he's assigned to a unit, and he fights through World War II. And then at the end of that, he comes back to Clinton to be the head of the ROTC unit.
That's right, and I did not know him until then.
Right. So, stories that Dad would tell about World War II that you would remember, what
Never.
would you?
He didn't talk about it. He never talked about his experiences in the war. And the only way you found out about him, he got so many awards that you could read about the rewards, just one after another. He kept figuring out a way to win a battle that nobody else could figure out. He really was a great soldier. And he kept getting promoted. You know, he was very young, and he was a lieutenant colonel when he was quite young, 26 maybe.
So he graduated in Presbyterian College at the age of 21 as a second lieutenant in 1941. 4 years later, in 1945, he was already a lieutenant colonel because of
battle successes.
So he'd been so successful during the war that they had promoted him. And in fact, in 1942, early in the war, Dad's unit was sent into New Guinea to stop the Japanese invasion on the north coast of New Guinea, and they were going towards Port Moresby, which is on the southern end of New Guinea, and that would be a stepping off point for invading Australia. So that was a big thing that Dad did with his unit, being able to stop the Japanese advance in the Pacific. And then he went back through stopping them there, and then went to the Philippines, and then into Japan as an occupying force. Then he came back from there, and that's where you met him at
Presbyterian
College.
He came back, and he had filled in for a little bit before he went into that service. He had filled in a little bit at the college, and the college was very eager to get him on their staff. And the president of the college kept after him to come work for the college, and he loved his school, and he decided to go back and do that until he decided. He had thought he would go to seminary and be a minister. When I met him, that's what he was going to do, and I hope I didn't have an impact on that.
So why?
But he was not suited to be a minister, to be a speaker. His grammar, his ability with language was not such that he should have been a speaker.
Yeah, but he was a great speaker anyway, because
it didn't matter because his stories were so terrific.
And he would laugh at his own jokes, and it's hilarious to listen to.
He was not
stories.
A polished speaker, but he was.
He was a good speaker. Okay, so now we've done that. So that's I think we'll call that the fourth segment, and we're going to pause here, and then we're going to do the fifth segment where Eloise, my sister, and I are born, and sort of take us up from there a little bit in the early years. So we're signing off here, but come back shortly.